I have kept this secret buried for 40 years. It was a horrific night on duty that I still cannot forget. It is the reason I walked away from the police force, despite working so hard to get that job in the first place. I was 21 years old at the time. I had just been hired in a poor, coastal district that lacked almost everything. During a night patrol shift, my partner and I received a call from residents near the South Beach. They said they saw something resembling a body washed up on the sand. We drove to the scene. When we arrived, we froze. It was the naked body of an adult man. Even worse, the corpse had no head. The cut at the neck was jagged, and the seawater had washed the remaining blood to a pale white. Back then, our equipment was primitive. Even the radio in our car was broken. After a quick discussion, we had to split up. My partner would drive back to the station to report and bring the forensics team in the morning, while I had to stay behind to guard the scene. I was young, inexperienced, and desperate to keep my job, so I agreed to stay. I stood a safe distance from the body and kept watch. The night became eerily still. There wasn't a breath of wind, only the steady, rhythmic sound of waves hitting the shore. The silence of the ocean at night has a strange, hypnotic power. I sat on a rock a few yards from the body, straining my eyes into the dark. But after several exhausting shifts, and in that absolute quiet, my mind began to fade. I told myself I'd just close my eyes for a second, but I fell into a deep sleep. When I woke up, the sun hadn't quite risen. My heart stopped when I looked at the spot on the sand. The body was gone. I was in a total panic. If the investigators arrived and the scene was empty, I would be fired or severely disciplined for sleeping on duty. In a desperate frenzy, I ran along the shoreline, hoping the body had just drifted into a nearby rock crevice. After walking a long way, I saw a man crouching behind a large reef. He was holding a small hatchet. I ran toward him, intending to ask if he had seen anything unusual. But the moment he saw me, he looked incredibly guilty. His eyes darted around, and his hands trembled as he tried to hide the axe behind his back. Before I could say a word, he stammered, "I didn't mean to. It was an accident. I just wanted to hide him for a while." I stopped in my tracks, my hand instinctively dropping to my holster. I realized right then that this man was the killer. He had returned in the night to drag the body away while I was asleep. But before I could draw my weapon, he lunged at me like a cornered animal, swinging the hatchet. Everything happened so fast. We struggled, and he attacked me with a crazed strength, clearly trying to eliminate the witness. In a split-second fight for survival, with the blade inches from my neck, I pulled my gun and fired. The bullet hit him square in the forehead. He dropped instantly. It took a long time for me to process what I had done. I looked at the man I had just shot, then out at the empty beach. I had killed a murderer, but I had done it while failing my duty. If I told the truth, my career would be over because I had lost the original crime scene. In a state of pure terror and desperation, I made the darkest decision of my life to save myself. I dragged the killer's body into a hidden crevice and stripped him naked. I used his own hatchet to take his head. I threw the head and his clothes into the deep ocean to erase his identity. Then, I hauled this new, headless body back to the beach and placed it exactly where the first victim had been. My plan was to turn the killer into the victim I was supposed to be guarding. A short while later, when my partner returned with the investigators, I luckily reported that the scene remained untouched. They examined the headless corpse, and since it matched the original description, they never suspected a thing. However, that secret became a life sentence for my soul. To this day, I still don't know where the original victim's body went, whether the killer hid it elsewhere or the tides swept it away. I used a barbaric act to protect my career. I swapped the villain for the victim just to cover up a few minutes of sleep. I resigned from the force shortly after. For 40 years, I have lived with an unquenchable guilt. I constantly wonder who the real victim was and how their family suffered when they vanished without a trace. I will take this secret to my grave, knowing that the justice I swore to protect was strangled by my own hands on that fateful night. Back then, My parents both worked long hours, so I was raised by a nanny named Carol. She was always there in the afternoons, carrying a heavy scent of perfume and speaking in a soft, airy voice. Carol didn't teach me normal childhood games like building blocks or coloring. Instead, she told me strange stories, and she constantly talked about the other world. One afternoon, she led me into the bathroom. She told me she was going to teach me a special game called the bathtub game. She was very clear about the rules. First, I had to play alone. No one else could be in the room. Second, I had to mix the water with plenty of soap and a dark liquid she had prepared until the water became so murky that it no longer reflected anything. Third, I had to endure the scalding hot water without crying out in pain, and I wasn't allowed to turn my head, no matter what I heard. And most importantly, I had to believe in what I saw and wait until the light completely disappeared. I asked her what the prize was for winning, and Carol said I would gain freedom. The way she said it made the prize sound irresistible, and I immediately agreed to play. Everything was set. I stepped into the bathtub. The water was painfully hot, but I forced myself to endure it. I sat down, took a deep breath, and slowly submerged my head. As soon as I was underwater, I felt a powerful force pulling me down deeper. I slowly opened my eyes, but the water was cloudy. I couldn't see anything except for a blurry spot where the drain was located. At first, it looked normal, but after a few seconds, the drain began to stretch out like a wide, gaping mouth. It started to vibrate as if it were alive. Around the edges, things that looked like hands appeared. Long, thin, distorted fingers gripping the rim of the drain. I was terrified, nearly forgetting that I was underwater. I opened my mouth to scream and immediately began to choke on the water. I tried to resurface, but a massive weight was pressing down on my back. I spiraled into a panic, my body thrashing instinctively to escape, but the more I struggled, the closer I was pulled toward that hole. Those hands began to move, reaching up toward me slowly. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't think of anything except getting out at any cost. The pressure in my chest felt like it was going to explode. My vision blurred, and then the light truly vanished. Not because I closed my eyes, but because everything around me sank into total darkness. Everything ended abruptly, and I lost all sensation. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. My parents were standing beside me, looking incredibly worried. They said I had fainted in the tub due to carelessness, and that I was lucky Carol had found me in time to save me. No one mentioned the game or asked why I did it, and I didn't tell them. But the most haunting part wasn't what I went through. It was the feeling that I had lost. I failed to finish the game, and because of that, I never received the freedom Carol had promised. As I grew up, I tried to recreate that game many times. I followed every step and every rule perfectly, but nothing ever happened. No hands, no pulling force, no widening drain, just normal water and silence. I slowly realized that the door probably only opens once, and I had missed my chance. A few days ago, I told this story to my son. He wasn't scared. Instead, he was fascinated. He asked me about the rules, about Carol, and about the prize. Finally, he asked me if he would win if he did everything right. I didn't answer him. Now, I am standing outside the bathroom door. My son is inside. I heard the sound of water splashing at first, but now, everything has gone silent. My hand is on the doorknob. All I have to do is turn it, and I could pull him out and end this right now. A part of me wants to do it immediately, but another part whispers that if I do, I will steal the only chance he has to win the game that I lost. I stand perfectly still, not moving, hardly daring to breathe. My phone is buzzing constantly with calls and texts from my ex-husband because I took our son from his house without permission. But I don't care. My name is Kane. I live in a rural part of West Texas, a place defined by bone-dry fields and long, straight highways that seem to stretch on forever. I have a small family with a wife and a daughter. Our lives would be perfect if I didn't constantly have to clean up the messes made by my younger brother Roger, who just refused to grow up. Roger got hooked on drugs, and that brought a whole mess of trouble. Debt, street fights, and constant lies. 2 days before everything went sideways, he called me asking where he could score. I knew immediately he was looking for meth. I lost my temper, yelled at him, and slammed the phone down. It wasn't our first fight, but it was the meanest thing I'd ever said to him. The next night, I heard he got into a huge blowout with his fiancée and vanished into the night. I wasn't too worried at first because he'd pulled stunts like this before. That changed 2 days later. Near midnight, my phone rang. It was Roger. His voice was frantic and out of breath. He sounded like he was in deep trouble. He said he was driving down Highway 277 and was about to run out of gas. More importantly, he claimed 3 men were hunting him down. My first reaction was doubt. Every time he talked about shadow people or men outside the door, it had always been a drug-induced hallucination. I snapped at him, told him to get his act together, and hung up. But 2 minutes later, the guilt ate at me. I woke up my wife, and we drove out to Highway 277. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep knowing he might be out there. That road is desolate at night. No streetlights, no houses, just empty space. When we got close to the spot Roger described, I saw his car pulled over on the shoulder, looking like it had been abandoned in a massive hurry. I stepped out and called his name, but the only response was the wind. Right then, my phone buzzed. It was Roger again. He whispered that he was close by, watching me. I spun around and scanned the darkness, but I saw absolutely nothing. I asked for his exact location, but his answers were vague and confused. Then, I saw police lights in the distance. I found out later that a passing truck driver had seen the abandoned car and called it in. The moment I told Roger the cops were arriving, his mood flipped. He had an active warrant, so he panicked. He told me not to trust the police and to leave immediately. Then, the line went dead. I stood there looking at his car, then out at the pitch-black fields, believing he was just hiding in the brush. Once again, I decided to cover for him. I told the officer that my brother had just run out of gas and was walking to find a station. The officer checked the car, found nothing suspicious, and eventually drove off. My wife and I stayed for a while, driving slowly up and down the highway. We called out for Roger and tried his phone dozens of times, but he never picked up again. Exhausted, and assuming he was just hiding until the coast was clear, we eventually went home. The next morning, the car was still there. His fiancée called to say he never made it home. That was when the real fear started to sink in. A massive search was launched. Canine units, helicopters, and infrared cameras scanned every inch of the land surrounding Highway 277. They found nothing. No footprints, no clothing, no Roger. The police eventually concluded that he was intentionally a missing person on the run from his warrant. They searched the area multiple times over the following weeks. Still, not a single clue turned up. 4 days after he vanished, Roger's fiancée checked his phone records and found a chilling detail. That night, Roger had called 911. Given his history, Roger would have avoided the police at all costs. If he called 911, it meant he was truly terrified for his life. When the police played the recording for me, my blood turned to ice. That wasn't the voice of someone tripping on drugs. Roger was screaming, sobbing, and begging for help. He said he was being chased through the fields. Even scarier, in the background of the tape, you could hear the distinct crunching of footsteps on dry grass and the cold, muffled voice of another man right before the call cut out. The last thing my brother ever said was, "They're out here." That was the last time I ever heard his voice. For years, the case went cold. The area was searched again and again with better technology, but it always came up empty. 8 years later, a group of volunteers went back to that same stretch of highway. This time, they found a pair of shorts, a piece of a shoe, and part of a human skull. It was all lying right there in the open field, very close to where the car had been left. DNA tests confirmed it was Roger. We finally found him, or what was left of him. But instead of closure, I only felt more haunted. That entire area had been picked over with a fine-tooth comb by professionals and dogs 8 years prior. There is no way they missed remains lying in plain sight. To this day, I am left with 2 dark theories. First, that every single law enforcement officer and search dog was so blind that they missed a body in a way that is almost impossible to believe. Second, that on that night, Roger was actually taken away to another place. And after many years, the killer, or someone who knew the truth, brought his bones and belongings back to that field and placed them there as a sick, silent taunt. I don't know which part is more terrifying, the silence or the memory. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, standing next to that empty car in the dead of night. I can still hear Roger's voice whispering through the phone, insisting that he was right here. I blame myself for not doing more to find him at that exact moment. Maybe if I had searched harder, everything would have turned out differently. His final words will haunt me for the rest of my life. "They're out here." And then, everything went silent.
My name is Joseph, and I am 44 years old. By day, I work as a warehouse laborer. By night, I transform into a practicing exorcist. I don't belong to any church. I have no formal training, and I certainly don't have a spiritual calling. What I am actually good at is acting. I've never even believed in demons. What I provide to my clients is nothing more than a placebo, but luckily, most of them feel it works. I was sitting around organizing my schedule for the coming days when I got a call from an unknown number. It was a woman. She said her son hadn't slept in days, his mental health was collapsing, and he insisted a woman was following him. I've heard these stories 1,000 times. I was sure this client was just a paranoid young guy cracking under work pressure or struggling with addiction. I almost said no because it was nearly 11 p.m., but when she offered triple my usual fee, I suddenly found the energy and headed out. The address was an apartment in an old building on the west side of the city. Ethan's mother was waiting for me in the lobby. She looked exhausted, her eyes red as if she were about to burst into tears. She led me into the apartment where Ethan was sitting on the sofa. Seeing him made me second-guess my assumptions. Ethan looked truly broken. His eyes were sunken, his skin was gray, and the way he kept darting his eyes toward the corner of the room showed his nerves were pushed to the limit. Ethan told me that every night, the woman appeared closer. At first, she was just a blurry shadow at the end of the hallway. Eventually, she stood at his bedroom door, and then right next to his bed. Each time she became clearer, showing a deformed face, swollen eyes, deep purple bruises around her neck, and a wide open mouth. I figured he was just a young man suffering from delusions, though his reaction was a bit more intense than other cases I'd seen. I put on a cold, serious face and began setting the stage. I told Ethan and his mother to sit inside a circle of candles, hold hands, and close their eyes. I strictly warned them that no matter what they heard, they must not let go or open their eyes. I would handle everything. I began mumbling the incantations I had memorized. Suddenly, halfway through the ritual, things spiraled out of control. My whole body jerked violently. I felt a tingling sensation like thousands of needles stabbing me at once. Even though I was still conscious, I couldn't control my own body anymore. Darkness slowly took over, and I accepted it helplessly. In the next few seconds, 3 images flashed before my eyes. First, an old wooden table with a steaming cup of hot chocolate on it. The surface of the liquid was vibrating as if someone were shaking the table. Next, a filthy bedsheet, torn and gripped tight by violent hands. Finally, a silver knife with an incredibly sharp blade. Then, I felt my mouth open. It seemed I was saying something, though I didn't intend to. Then, darkness swallowed me again. I'm not sure how much time passed, but when I woke up, I was lying on the floor. My whole body ached as if I had been jumped by a mob. My throat was burning, and my head throbbed like it was being hit with a hammer. The first thing I noticed was that Ethan was gone. His mother was standing in the corner, her face white and her eyes wide with terror. I sat up and asked where Ethan went, but she could only make quiet, stuttering noises. A moment later, she told me, trembling, that I had acted as if I were possessed. She said while I was chanting, my body suddenly went into violent convulsions. My head snapped up, my mouth opened, and I screamed at Ethan in a high-pitched woman's voice.
"You killed me, and you're going to die the same way."
Ethan had let out a blood-curdling scream, started slapping his own face repeatedly, and then bolted out of the apartment like a madman. I sat there speechless. Of course, I didn't believe in ghosts, but I couldn't deny that I had lost total control of my body and had no idea what I had done. I hurriedly packed my gear and left the apartment, completely forgetting to collect my fee. I threw my bag down when I got home, feeling truly finished with this exorcism business. But I knew I needed the money. I slept until the next afternoon. I went back to my day job, and since everything seemed normal, I brushed the night off as just a bizarre gig. A week later, while I was organizing my fake exorcism schedule, I was interrupted again. This time it wasn't a call, but a knock at the door. 2 police officers were there looking for me. They told me that Ethan had taken his own life with a gun in a hotel room. Even more shocking, his mother had called the police immediately, claiming my exorcism had driven her son insane. I honestly told the police everything that had happened that night. I mentioned the 3 images I had seen. The 2 officers looked at each other in total shock. They told me those details matched the crime scene of a murdered girl named Elsie perfectly. They were suspicious because the details of that investigation hadn't been released to the public yet. They wanted to know how I knew. The crime scene had exactly the 3 details you described, they said. The girl was strangled with a bedsheet. Then she was stabbed with a knife. And on the nightstand, there was a cup of hot chocolate that she hadn't finished drinking. My body went numb hearing their description. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't deny what I had experienced. The investigation eventually concluded that Ethan was indeed the one who had murdered Elsie. It was incredibly strange, but my fake exorcism had provided the crucial clues the police needed to close the case. I deleted all my contact info and ads from every platform. I never dared to call myself a psychic or an exorcist again. I had made a lot of money off the desperation of others, and I realized that was the most sinful and foolish thing I had ever done. I swear I didn't make up those supernatural details, but I can't explain them clearly either. I am haunted by the fact that I mocked the spiritual world, only for the spiritual world to choose me as the bridge to solve a murder.
I'm Lori, and I live with my parents and younger brother in Millfield, Ohio. That night was the 4th of July. I was sitting on the sofa flipping through TV channels when the first firework exploded. Lori, can I have some hot chocolate? My brother Josh called from the kitchen. Hot chocolate in July, are you sure? I chuckled softly, but still got up to make it for him. I was 18 and used to taking care of Josh when my parents were out. My parents had gone to Akron to visit Aunt Margaret because she broke her leg. They'd be back late, probably after midnight. Before they left, Mom had repeatedly told me, lock the doors securely, don't open for anyone, and call me right away if anything happens. I walked into the kitchen and opened the fridge for milk. I looked out the window. The neighbors' houses were lit up, and the sounds of families laughing and watching fireworks drifted in. Lori, someone's in the backyard. Josh's voice suddenly turned serious. I turned to see Josh standing by the living room window, the curtain pulled back just a crack. It's probably Mr. Henderson watering his plants. I poured milk into the pot. It's not Mr. Henderson. They're wearing a white lab coat, like a doctor. I turned off the stove and walked to the window. Josh stepped back, his face pale. I looked out. In the dim light from the porch lamp, I saw a figure standing by the fence, their back to me. The man was tall and thin, wearing a white lab coat and black pants. He stood silently, as if observing something. It's probably a doctor from the hospital. Maybe someone got hurt by fireworks. I offered a logical explanation, but my heart started pounding faster. The man turned around. His face was pale, his dark eyes staring directly at the window. He smiled stiffly. Lori, I know you're in there. His voice echoed through the glass. I flinched, pulling Josh away from the window. The man stepped closer. My blood ran cold. I pulled out my phone, but my hand shook too hard and it fell to the ground. Lori, I don't want to hurt you. He was now right at the door, placing his hand on the glass. You wish you could be a better sister, right, Lori? Josh suddenly burst into tears. What is he talking about, Lori? I hugged him tight, my brain spinning, trying to make sense of it. Why would he know that? Suddenly, a loud crash of breaking glass. The man had smashed the kitchen window. He reached in, unlocked it, and climbed into the house. Run! I pulled Josh upstairs, my heart pounding like a drum. We ran into my parents' room. I locked the door. Lori, don't run anymore. I just want to help. His footsteps echoed from downstairs, slow and steady. He wasn't rushing, as if he knew we couldn't escape. Josh trembled in my arms. Lori, I'm scared. I don't want to die. You won't die. I'll protect you. I looked around the room for something to defend myself with. In my mom's dresser drawer was a box cutter. I grabbed it, the small blade trembling in my hand. Lori, do you remember the day it happened? The day the stray bullet flew into the playground? The man's voice now sounded like it was right outside the bedroom door. You witnessed Josh die right there. No, I screamed. Josh is still here. He's alive. The man's voice echoed through the wooden door. Lori, you've been living in an illusion for the past 5 years. Josh has been dead for a long time. I looked down at Josh in my arms. He was still trembling, still breathing, still warm. That's not true. Josh is still here. The door opened even though I had locked it securely. The man stepped in. Lori, it's time you face the truth. He reached out to us. I swung the small knife, trying to protect Josh, but when I looked down, my arms were empty. Josh was gone. Light suddenly flooded the room. My mom's voice echoed from downstairs. Lori! We're home. I blinked. The man had vanished. I was sitting alone in my parents' room, the knife stuck in the wooden wall. My parents ran up, their faces full of worry. Lori, what are you doing here? Why are you holding a knife? I looked around the room, searching. Where's Josh? Where is Josh? Mom knelt beside me and burst into tears. Lori, Josh passed away 5 years ago. I stared at my parents in shock. Memories of that day flooded back. Josh lying in a pool of blood on the playground, the sirens and screams. I held him in my arms, begging him not to die, but it was too late. No, Josh is alive. I just talked to him. Dad placed a hand on my shoulder. Lori, we're taking you back to the hospital. Dr. Peter will help you. I sat there trembling. In the corner of the room, I still saw the shadow of the man in the white lab coat. So he was my doctor. But I knew very well that no matter how much medication I took or how many doctors I saw, the terrifying feeling and the pain of losing Josh would always stay with me. Outside the window, fireworks still bloomed in the Ohio summer night sky. But for me, summer had ended a long time ago.
My name is Charity. Even now, whenever I think back to what happened when I was 7 years old, I still get chills. I was too young then to truly understand what was going on, but looking back, I know I was very close to something horrific that day. Back then, my mom was a single parent. She worked tirelessly from dawn until dusk just to make ends meet for the two of us. We had no relatives in this city, and we didn't have enough money for a babysitter. Because of that, during long school breaks, my mom was forced to leave me home alone for 6 to 8 hours every day. My mom was very strict about safety rules. I was never allowed to open the door for anyone because she had her own key. I could only answer the phone if she called at a scheduled time and said the exact phrase, "It's Mom." The curtains always had to stay closed, and I was strictly forbidden from touching the stove or anything dangerous. She also prepared meals in advance so I could grab them when I got hungry. At the time, being home alone didn't seem scary to me. It all started with a doll wedding. I needed real flowers to decorate the altar for them. Even though I knew my mom forbade me from going outside, I took a risk and opened the back door to pick some wildflowers in the yard. While I was leaning down, I jumped when I saw our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Elise, standing by the fence watering her plants. She looked at me with a cold, stern expression. I just gave her a nervous smile and bolted back inside, hoping she wouldn't tell on me. A few days later, I snuck out to the front yard to pick up some stones to build a castle. Suddenly, the dry screech of the metal gate made my heart stop. A strange woman was walking up our driveway. Instinctively, I yelled at the top of my lungs, "Mom, I'm over here!" to pretend an adult was home. Then I dashed inside and locked the door. Peeking through the curtains, I saw her knock repeatedly before she walked back to an old car parked on the street and drove away, looking frustrated. I thought that was the end of it, and I was too scared to tell my mom. The next day, the nightmare officially knocked on my door. While I was eating lunch, the knocking started again. I sat perfectly still, but a deadly curiosity forced me to peek through the blinds. To my horror, the woman was also leaning in, her eye pressed against the glass. We locked eyes from only inches away. I was terrified and thought I had been caught doing something wrong, so I took a chance and opened the door. She looked quite polite, wearing an office dress with her hair tied back. She looked a lot like my mom. She said she wanted to see my mom, and I lied, saying she was in the shower. But the woman immediately pushed the door open, stepped inside, and said she would wait. I protested, but her attitude changed instantly. She looked me straight in the eye and said she knew perfectly well I was home alone. Then she threatened to call the police because my mom had abandoned a child at home. I immediately burst into tears and started begging her. She looked at me for a moment, then softened her voice. She said that if I went with her, my mom wouldn't get into trouble and could pick me up after work. At that moment, my only thought was that I had to do something to protect my mom, so I agreed. I ran to my room, grabbed my favorite doll and a book, and came back. Then, I followed her outside. As we got close to the car, I remembered to ask if I should call my mom to let her know where we were going. At that exact moment, her tone shifted completely. She laughed and told me that my mom would never know, because I was never coming back. I immediately started screaming and tried to pull my hand away, but she gripped me tight and tried to force me into the car. In that moment of total despair, Mrs. Elise appeared. She waved and gave me a smile that, for the first time, felt incredibly warm. She walked toward us and asked what was going on. The strange woman went back to her gentle tone, saying she was taking care of me because there were no adults in the house. But Mrs. Elise stayed very calm. She looked at me, and her face wasn't cold anymore. "Hey, Katie, I told you I was just going home to grab a few things and would be right back, didn't I?" I froze, not quite understanding, but before I could say anything, Mrs. Elise turned to the woman. She explained firmly that she was my official babysitter. Mrs. Elise's presence and her confident, steady attitude made the woman hesitate. She let go of me, shoved me toward my neighbor, gave a fake smile, and muttered a few words before jumping into her car and speeding off. Once the woman was out of sight, Mrs. Elise led me into the house, locked the door, and used the landline to call my mom. I was exhausted from crying and fell fast asleep. When I woke up, I was in my mother's arms. She was crying so hard she had lost her voice, holding me tight as if she were afraid I would vanish again. It turned out that Mrs. Elise had been watching our house for a long time. She realized I was often home alone, and at first, she was cold toward us because she didn't agree with my mom leaving a small child by herself. However, when she saw a strange car lingering and then saw that woman dragging me toward it while I was screaming, her grandmotherly instincts kicked in. She had been watching the woman since the day before and had a gut feeling that something was wrong. Because she was afraid of getting into trouble with Child Protective Services, CPS, my mom didn't dare call the police. But after that incident, Mrs. Elise officially became my babysitter without asking for a single cent. She said I reminded her of her granddaughter who lived far away. More than 20 years have passed, and Mrs. Elise is old and frail now, but she is still an essential member of our family. I owe her my life. If she hadn't been brave enough to step across that yard that day, no one knows where that stranger would have taken me, or if I would even be here to tell this story today. My name is Carrie. I grew up in a small town, but I left many years ago for college. I wanted to escape the suffocating atmosphere of judgment and narrow-mindedness that defined my home. However, a relative's funeral recently forced me to go back. The funeral was typical for a small town, heavy and somber. I saw old faces, people who had been a part of my childhood, all now weathered by time. After the service, everyone gathered at the home of the deceased for a small reception with food and drinks. In a town like this, that is a tradition everyone expects. The living room was cramped, smelling of damp wood and reheated food. My relatives huddled together, clutching glasses of cheap wine. They started gossiping to update me on everything that had happened in town over the last 5 years. The conversation really began when my uncle mentioned that the famous Harris General Store had closed down. That name caught my attention immediately. It was the oldest shop in town, owned by the Harris family for generations. Almost everyone there had shopped or worked there at some point. Back in high school, I had a part-time job there, so I knew the family well. According to the group, the old owner, Robert Harris, passed away about a year ago. After the funeral, his 2 sons, Daniel and Luke, took over the business together. At first, things seemed stable, but after only a few months, bitter tension grew between the brothers. Daniel wanted to keep the store exactly as it was, following the traditional family way. Luke, on the other hand, wanted to sell the land to a large supermarket chain that was looking to open a branch in town. There was also a nasty dispute over Robert's will, as rumors spread that only one of them was named the primary heir. The disagreements turned into constant fighting. The 2 brothers argued frequently, sometimes right in the store in front of customers. Everyone in town knew about it, but no one thought it would end in a way that could never be fixed. One day, Daniel and Luke met with a lawyer to discuss the store's ownership. When they walked back to the parking lot in front of the shop, the fighting continued. Both of them lost their cool and began screaming at each other in the middle of the lot. Luke climbed into his pickup truck to leave. Daniel stood directly in front of the truck, blocking his brother from driving away while continuing to yell insults. No one knows exactly what was said, but the situation spiraled out of control. In a fit of blind rage, Luke slammed on the gas and the truck lunged forward. Daniel was struck and knocked down right in front of the truck. He died from massive injuries. Luke was arrested by the police right there at the scene. After the incident, the Harris store closed its doors forever. It all happened so fast that the whole town was left in shock. I sat there in silence as I listened. I couldn't believe a place with such a long history and a solid reputation had become the center of such a tragedy. Suddenly, an aunt sitting near me let out a soft giggle. She leaned toward me, lowering her voice as if she were sharing a juicy secret. She told me the town rumor was that after the first hit, Daniel didn't die right away. They say Luke put the truck in reverse and ran over him one more time. A few people sitting near us heard her and burst out laughing. I jerked back and sat up straight, looking around the room. I was horrified by what she said and even more stunned by everyone's reaction. At first, it was just small chuckles, but then an uncle repeated the line like he was telling a hilarious joke. Ran him over again, just to be sure. The phrase spread quickly. One person repeated it, then another. The laughter grew louder and clearer, as if they were all sharing a great comedy routine. I felt a shiver run down my spine. I sat there frozen, staring at the people around me. Just minutes ago, these same people were standing by a casket with sad faces, sharing their grief. But now, they were laughing at such a cruel, gruesome detail. The sudden shift made my blood run cold. One uncle turned to me and asked if I remembered the Harris brothers. Immediately, every eye in the room turned toward me. It felt like they were all waiting to see how I would react. I didn't answer. I just sat there, looking around. Everyone was still laughing. But then I noticed something that filled me with pure terror. Their smiles. They were all exactly the same. The corners of their mouths curled up in the same way. Their eyes were opened as wide as possible, but their gaze was empty and lifeless. I didn't run away. I just sat there, staring back at them. I happened to glance at the glass window next to me. In the faint reflection, I could see the entire room behind me, and I saw myself. The corners of my mouth were also curled up into a smile just like theirs. I didn't remember when I started laughing. I couldn't stop, and I couldn't move, even though I was fully aware of what I was doing. At that exact moment, an old memory flashed into my mind. Years ago, when I was in high school, there was another shocking incident in this town. It was an accident that killed 2 people. That night, I had been sitting in this same kitchen with these same relatives. They told the story in the exact same tone, adding gory details, and then they all laughed together. I remember that feeling very clearly, because that night I had laughed too.